China has completed construction of a 400-meter bridge, high-resolution images of which were first published on NDTV.com in January 2 years ago and broadcast on NDTV 24/7. New images with NDTV from July 22nd this month show that the bridge has been black-topped with light motor vehicles plying across it. Firstly, this is the region that we are talking about. Let's bring up those graphics. The high-altitude Pangong Lake in Ladakh. Soldiers from India and China had clashed here in 2020 prior to the Galwan incident. This is the image of the blacktop bridge that China has constructed across the Pangong. Let's stay on this for a moment. You can see that bridge quite clearly. It's been blacktop, the asphalt is on, and it is operational. How do we know that? Because if you zoom in further, you can actually see that there are motor vehicles on the bridge. So we've circled motor vehicles on that bridge. There is road access on either side, but whether it's entirely complete, the road access on the southern front, we aren't entirely sure at this stage, but it is likely to have been done. It is important to note that the bridge is on territory that China has occupied since 1958. Indian soldiers used to patrol the area earlier, but control of this was taken away by the Chinese. The External Affairs Ministry directed us to an earlier statement on the construction of the Pangong Bridge, and they said this bridge is being constructed in areas that have been under illegal occupation by China for around 60 years now. In fact, 62 years, because it's been 2 years since this statement came out. As you are well aware, India has never accepted such illegal occupation. Now, the bridge and road access on either side enables China to cut short travel distance between the north and the south banks of the Pangong Lake by several hours. Before the bridge was opened, Chinese soldiers had to travel to their base in Rutog by going around the lake. Now Chinese soldiers can cross the bridge and use this road, which is under construction. It saves them up to 100 kilometers. Now, since the clashes with China, India has stepped up infrastructure development in Ladakh, opening up tunnels to ensure all-season access to the region. In 2021, 87 bridges were constructed in Ladakh alone. In 2022, the government committed more than 2,000 crores for infrastructure development along the frontier with China, with 18 key projects being assigned for Ladakh. Well, joining us now, Brahma Chilani, the Strategic Affairs expert, Lieutenant General Subroto Saha, and Meera Shankar, former Indian ambassador. General Saha, let me come to you first. What is the significance of China constructing a bridge across the Pangong? We've established that it's in territory. It's not a new incursion. I mean, it is our territory, that's a larger point. But with this bridge, what does it enable them to potentially do?
See, first, it's a significant development that has taken place. Like you mentioned, we've been tracking it for the last couple of years or so. It has given China much more flexibility in positioning its forces, positioning its other assets, which can affect our operations over there. Second, it has given them flexibility in being able to, maneuver around in this area, which otherwise was hitherto restricted by the terrain. But from a larger point of view, Vishnu, we have to understand the speed at which China is constructing infrastructure, because this bridge is not in isolation. If you see the storage sites, if you see the weapon sites, if you see the airfields, I mean, it is across the board, the kind of infrastructure which is being developed. It is not meant for tourism, as it is sometimes purported to be. It has very significant military implications from our point of view. So it is important that we also have to increase our speed of development of the infrastructure. We have to infuse much better technologies to be able to overcome the challenges of the terrain. And equally, I think we have to find ways by which we break and hasten the way we do business, whether it is with infrastructure, whether it is in terms of the capability development of our forces. Our procedures really need to be reformed and moved at a much faster pace.
Sure.
Because I think we are actually running out of time. Back to you.
Brahma Chilani, I just want to go back to that last image. If we can have that up once again. The importance of this is that the Chinese can no longer need to go. Let's have that graphic up, which is what I was explaining. Can I have that up, please? The Chinese no longer need to go around Pangong Lake. They can actually use that bridge and go from the north to the south. Let's go to the next image. Yeah. So this is the old route, and this is now potentially the new route. Brahmachalani, what does this enable them to do?
China is systematically changing the military landscape all along the Indo-Tibetan frontier. As General Saha pointed out, that the bridge is only one example of how the landscape is being changed. But all this raises larger questions. It's been more than 4 years since China made its stealth encroachments in Eastern Ladakh. We still do not have an answer as to why India was taken unawares by those stealth encroachments. As if that were not bad enough, why did India subsequently withdraw from areas traditionally patrolled by Indian forces to jointly establish with China some buffer zones in Eastern Ladakh, largely on Indian territory? The buffer zone in the Pangong region involved India vacating the strategic Kailash range. In the Pangong region, the entire buffer zone was set up on the territory that India patrolled until China made its stealth encroachments in April 2020. The buffer also includes a swath of area that China had never claimed. This is the area from the Indian base, which is located between fingers 2 and 3 to finger 4. Now, this buffer zone has allowed China to construct a division-level headquarters at the edge of the lake, along with this bridge and another smaller bridge across the lake, and more importantly, underground warfare-related infrastructure.
No, and
So
they've
we
been
are pay-
stepping up that
so we are
underground
paying
infrastructure in all
enduring
parts, in
costs
several parts of Ladakh.
for mistakes that we have made, and we still do not have an answer to fundamental questions.
Andrew KP Leung, you know, the real worry over here is that at some stages it almost seems inevitable that in the future, tragically, there may be another military confrontation between India and China. There have been dozens of rounds of, more than a dozen rounds of military talks, and yet China continues to occupy those areas where they made incursions back in 2020. In order for the relationship between the two countries to normalize, right? Not just in Ladakh, but in other sectors as well. Do you believe that more needs to be done? Because we've hit an impasse. I don't think either side would disagree that there is a fundamental impasse at this stage. What do you suggest, sir, needs to be done to break that?
Well, obviously, the impasse, as you rightly pointed out, is not going to be resolved just by the military, between the military. I mean, it must be a political solution, because both countries are sticking to their respective claims of their sovereignty, the areas where they claim sovereignty. There is a great deal of disagreement. The line of actual control has not been clearly defined or clearly agreed, and it's been going on, as pointed out, for decades. And that's it's only reasonable that China is going to double down on their respective claims and consolidate their defenses. In the same way as India is also building infrastructure on their sides, bridges and highways. So I think that both sides are only consolidating their claims. It's not going to lead to a solution. I think the solution must be political at a higher level. And then both leaders have also made clear that both sides need to de-escalate. But while the constructions are going on both sides, and both sides are only seeing not eye to eye, but speaking past each other. And obviously, if you are, most of my counterparts on this panel are with a military background, and of course, the military, the primary obligation is to defend the country, and that happens, and that's the same for both sides. So I don't think the situation is going to be resolved just by the military talks. It's going to be, it can only face any hope of a long-term sustainable solution at the political level.
In fact, let me ask Ambassador Meera Shankar about that. Ma'am, the thing is that India has engaged in political conversations with China. There have been political conversations which have taken place at the level of Doklam, which took place in Bhutan. Just prior to that, we had a face-off. Then the thing seemed to have been resolved, but then there was this Chinese incursion in Ladakh. There have been so many rounds of talks, foreign minister level talks, very brief exchanges between the heads of state as well. From a diplomatic standpoint, how does one resolve this?
Look, I think for India, it was a shock, actually, when the Chinese incursions took place, because you had the agreement on peace and tranquility on the border of 1993. You had other confidence-building measures for the border in place, and that had really helped to keep the peace between the two sides. But now we find that China has adopted a more nationalistic position on their territorial disputes. And you have a policy which really says that China is going to enforce its sovereignty or exercise its sovereignty over every inch of territory that it claims. Now, given that there are disputed boundaries with other countries, both on land and maritime boundaries, a position like this means that you're setting the situation up for skirmishes and conflict, or China expects that it will be able to kind of bulldoze its way in negotiations or discussions. Now, from India's point of view, we've been seeking a rollback of these incursions and steps to restore trust, to restore the status quo. Some steps have been taken. There's been criticism by experts. You heard Brahmchalani before this, that India too has pulled back in certain areas and created buffer zones in its own territory. But in Depsang, I think there's still a face-off. There's no progress in the Depsang area. And of course, in the meanwhile, China has continued to strengthen its military infrastructure and deployments in Tibet. So for India, that becomes a point of great concern, because it means that China is preparing to, be in a position to mobilize militarily very speedily, should the need arise. And for India, we've had to take countermeasures to build up our infrastructure in this region. Of course, we're much slower than China, and we still have quite a way to go in terms of completing all the projects.
In fact, ma'am, I wanted
which
to
are underway.
just get a quick comment, one more quick comment from General Saha. What has India done to... The philosophy in the past, of course, was that we don't build infrastructure, and that proved to be disastrous in the long run. Why? Because the sense was that if you open up infrastructure, you can potentially enable the Chinese to come closer. But now we've changed that. So if there are any positives, would you suggest that road access now in Ladakh is much better? We've got access through 2 or 3 different routes, tunnels coming up, and a lot more. Do you think that's making a difference on the ground?
Yes, of course. I mean, the fact that we have sustained the enhanced deployment over the last 4 years through that, through the winters particularly, is sufficient, indication of the improved capability as it exists today. Having said that, because of the terrain challenges, there are limitations in terms of the number of axials or the roads through which you can access these areas. And at the same time, there are limitations in the number of laterals connecting these axials to be able to switch forces and all. What has China done? Primarily by building this bridge across Pangong. Today, it's all very well. It may be for light vehicles, but you can be definitely, sure that it is going to, the capacity will be expanded very soon for heavy vehicles. So what is it doing? It is enhancing its ability in terms of even the laterals which are connecting the axis.
Yeah.
In any case, in further depth, China has the advantage of operating over a plateau. In our case, you are aware of the kind of terrain you are reporting very recently from Kargil, weren't you? So you have seen the kind of terrain that we have to negotiate to get to this place. So in our case, the challenge of the terrain demands a much swifter way of doing infrastructure, whereas we have improved, but we certainly need to do a lot more.
Look, I'm out of time on this program. I'd like you to thank all of my panelists very much. You know, it is food for thought. If you look at infrastructure development by the Chinese, it is a matter of huge concern. Yes, India is doing a lot, but I think the general makes an important point when he says that there are disadvantages in terms of the terrain that we face. But the pace at which China is doing all of this, that's what India needs to be really worried about at this stage. We're going to take a short break. There's more coming up.